Okay. So I'll actually start from scratch just so we're all on the same page. So I went ahead and made a fresh project folder for myself in the motion capture in the directory here in Google, called it Kirby Motion Capture. It's just got all the default stuff because I used the project window thing to make my project as per usual. Keep doing that habit. It seemed like pretty much everybody on the last project had this set up, so keep going with that. It's excellent. The first thing that I'll do is start to populate one of the other folders that maybe hasn't gotten used yet, that I use all the time. It's called assets. So this is where I just dump everything that is going to be used in my project before it gets edited. This is like my folder for all my source documents. So like the original version of my character or any animation files or sound files or whatever. Actually, no, just those two, not sound files. Sound files go in the sounds folder because Maya can import sounds. Anyway, so here in my assets folder, I went ahead and just dragged in the castle guard that I was working with on Monday. And then this new one, which has a ridiculous name and makes no sense, character 43 non-PBR. It looks like a big wrestler person. So a luchador, I think they're called. But now that I've done that, I will use import to get this character into my scene. When I do that, it should look ginormous. So by default, the scene is in centimeters, and you can see that he's much bigger than a centimeter. So I'll go ahead and switch my scene over to be in meters, just so things make a little more sense. By clicking on the little sprocket in the bottom right, go to settings and meter and save that. And if I were to make a default cube, anytime you make a default cube, it's going to be 1 unit by 1 unit by 1 unit. This is I've set my scene to meters. So this cube is 1 meter by 1 meter by 1 meter. So if I put it next to my character, like that, you can see that he's a little bit more than 1 meter. So I could just come in here and type 2 for all of my dimensions. So now this is 2 meters. If I look at him from the front, you can see that he's less than 2 meters tall, more than 1 meter tall. It's about average human height. I think the average human is 1.6 meters tall or something like that. I don't know direct conversion. I think 1 meter is 40 inches. So anyway, I usually look for a character to be between 1 and 2 meters tall. It's a good frame of reference. Anyway, now that I have that, I will come up here to the X-ray joints toggle in my panel, just so I can see what's going on. Joints are really small right now, so I'll adjust the display size so it's a little easier to see. If you're in meters, a joint display scale of 1 usually looks pretty good. This is weird. Look at that. It's going back in time. Okay. I think Maya's freaking out. I might have to restart it. I'm not doing that. Yep, I'm going to restart Maya. Joint display size. So under display, you can go to animation and then joints or joints display scale. I don't think I've ever seen Maya do that before. It's a new one to me. And I guess this is, you'll see, every time I start working, I'm gonna work in Maya, this is how I do it. I click on the Maya icon. I don't double click any scene files, just because I want to force myself to come up here to go file, set project, and then make sure that I'm always setting my project. That's the first thing I do. All right, so now that I'm in my base scene, I need to re-import my character from my assets folder. It's really weird. So it looks like it's messing with the timeline when I brought my character in. So I'm just resetting it real quick. And I'll come over here to my settings again, make sure it's in meters, and we should be back to business. Go ahead and save. Activate X-ray joints. Now we're good. All right, cool. So just to repeat the process, I'll go pretty quick, but
Wait, Kirby, what did you, I'm sorry, I mean to interrupt. What did you click on to show your joints?
this little toggle here, it's called X-ray joints. If you don't want to use the toggle, you can also go to shading and say X-ray joints.
Okay, thank you.
So this is the little tiny button for human IK. You can also come up here to Windows, Animation, Human IK. I'll go ahead and click this. Opens it up. I'll tear it off so it doesn't go away when I don't want it to. The other thing I'll make sure to do is group up my character so that I can easily organize. Wrestler. And save. All right, so the first step in defining a character, you want to create a custom or character definition. To bring up this familiar view. And then you just run through defining and matching each joint. So starting with the hip, I'll right click, assign this, right click, assign. Ooh, and we may have a good candidate for things not being defined well. You see how you bow-legged? This may throw off the character definition. I don't know, so you might have to fix it. Oh, cancel. Turn that off so that doesn't keep getting clicked.
So doing it for one leg will automatically do it for the second leg. Is that what I'm seeing?
It will if they are mirrored. If they are not mirrored, then it won't automatically do it and you'll have to hand define it. Okay. So this character is correctly mirrored, so it is doing that. Okay, and once I've finished this definition, what I'm going to do is show you how to save that definition for future use. In case, for whatever reason, your character gets disconnected. Okay. This window, you can either click this button here or Windows Animation Human IK. Create character definition. All right, I'm getting the green check mark. So what is the important thing to do at this point? Lock it. Who said lock it? Yes, lock it down. Got to click the lock. Otherwise, it will get very upset when you start to try and animate it. What's up, Gary?
Sorry, can you mind just repeating how you just did drops? Let's say,
How do you, sorry?
increase the size of the joints
Uh-huh, yeah, it's under display, animation, joint size. And that'll bring up this little slider. Uh-huh. All right, so it says my character definition is valid. I
I
want
just have a
to,
small question, Kirby. So when I'm assigning the spine
uh-huh.
and I kind of click on the arrows to bring up like the full spine, do I have to click some of the I guess some of the choices on the top of the body for the top body, or do I just go up the row?
No, you go up the row.
Okay.
Yep, start at the bottom and go up.
Okay.
All right. Yes. Yes, it is. Yes. So this, I'm gonna call this character Billy. Because I don't want to name it exactly the same as my group, which is wrestler, because if I tried to, it would get upset. So I'm gonna remember that this guy's named Billy, and that should be helpful there. So I'll go ahead and save. So now anytime I open up my scene, this character is already defined. I don't have to go through this again. It's saved per scene. But just as an example, what I will do, open this up, come over here to the human IK window, the little thing that looks like a 3.5-inch floppy disk. Clearly somebody born a long time ago made this UI. You can define a template. So since I have run through and connected everything, this character has a certain way of being named, and you can save that for future use. What it's able to glean from how this character is set up is that an example bone would be named like this, and that this thing has a prefix called mixamo colon. So this is correct. Sometimes it won't guess right, and you'll have to write in the correct things in this field. So because I downloaded it from Mixamo, if you're using a Mixamo character, you'll usually get this, which is that it will guess correctly because they did a good job making sure that everything lined up. If you write your own character and you make your own character definition, sometimes you'll have to type in here the correct things, like your prefix might be you know, Alex underscore, and then all the bones come after that or something like that. But in this case, it's Mixamo colon. So I'm going to name this template Kirby template, just so it's easy to find, and hit OK. So that template gets saved locally to your machine, whatever you're working on currently. So if you are trying to load up your template at home after working here, you won't have access to that thing. You'll have to load up the template again at home. But an easy way to transfer it would be go ahead and define the thing, save your scene, and then you could open up your scene at home and then save this as a template at home too, and you'll have access to it. Okay, so why is this cool? Why is this important? I'll go ahead and open up a new scene and import in my knight or my guard that I was working on yesterday. It's messing up my frames again. Frustrating, but whatever. All right. The scene is teeny tiny. Once again, come in here to settings, make it neater. Save this scene as character 2. Like that. Okay. So if I wanted to make a character, I would create character definition. I'm completely empty here. What I could do is load up a character, and it's telling me now I must select at least one bone from the skeleton that I want to add this to. So great. Put on my X-ray joints. I'll select my hip. Go to load. And it's asking me which template I want to use. And I want to use the Kirby template and match all bones with prefix or match only selected bones. Go ahead and leave this first one active and hit OK. I think by default, it will work. So because both of these characters came from Mixamo, all Mixamo characters are named the same way. So once you define one Mixamo character, you can save that skeleton, and this guy is ready to go as long as I lock it. So now I have a second character already defined because I put in all that hard work, saved it, and get to reuse the character definition. So I'll go ahead and save, go back to my other scene. Character one. All right, so any questions so far on character definition and how you can save a character definition and reuse it, especially for Mixamo characters? Going once, yep.
I still have a bit of a problem because I have a red X where the check mark is on the required.
A red X when you're doing the loaded character definition or when you're defining your character for the first time? Okay. I guess hold off for just now. I'll do the end. I think that I can show you in the individual check-in. Yes. Yeah, we'll hold on. We'll hold on that. Yeah.
And so just to clarify, so if we did our maximum rate.
Sorry, mine's really loud.
So if we do this for which we want we could take the animation.
Yeah, we should be able to use the same template for even the imported ones too. Yeah. Cool. So that leads into the next thing that I'll recommend everybody do is referencing animation files versus importing them directly into your scene. So what can happen, which maybe over the past couple of days, if you've been experimenting with working with stuff, you just clicked and dragged the animation into the scene or you imported it in directly. And what will happen is because they all come from Mixamo, they all have the same joint names. And what Maya does by default oftentimes is if things are named the same, it'll just update it with whatever the latest thing you dragged in there is. So if you dragged in like a breakdancing file into this wrestler one, it would override the hips on the wrestler with the new breakdancing hips, which includes animation information. It might move it too. So the character will look different because it'll probably move the joint position. And then it'll also have keyframes on it. So the character will start going all crazy. So to avoid that, what you can use is referencing. So under File, Reference Editor, this is the thing we're going to use. Before I do that, I'll go ahead and move a couple animation clips into my project folder.
Kirby, I think I'm missing a step. How did you get the, I guess after you, if you on your left-hand side on your outlier, I see you have the group of your actual mesh and your joints. Okay. Oh, no, I'm sorry. I thought you had an extra group over there. I just didn't know where it came from. Okay. Sorry about that.
Yep, no worries. Okay, so I'll find my motion capture project, my assets folder. And then in the class resources, in the shared project, there's all the YBot FBX animation. So I'll go ahead and I'll import in a fun one. I'll import in the breakdance up rock plan. Oh, whoops, I didn't mean to do that. So yes, don't drag and drop. You just saw me do the thing that you should not do. Copy it and paste it so that you're just getting a duplicate for yourself and you're not taking it away. All right, so I've got that there. Yes, yes. Now that it's in my assets folder, I can easily go to reference editor. It brings up this window. I like to use the little plus diamond here to pick which file I want to import. So I'll go up one, go to assets, and then breakdance up rock. And when you do that, it automatically adds the file name to the front of every single object in your scene, which makes it so that there won't be any name collisions. So now I've got this movement in here and I haven't messed up the wrestler. So at this point, I would have access, or I would have the ability to define a new character for my scene, which will be this animation. So just temporarily, I'll hide the wrestler, so it's a little easier to work on this character. And I'll run through how to zero this out one more time. If I were to link up the joints and define this character in the current pose, it wouldn't work very well for retargeting because it's not starting in T pose. We always want to start in T pose. So once again, I'll make a new character. I'll rename it immediately just so I can easily flip back and forth between them. I'll call this breakdance 1. Like that. Now that I have that, I should be able to start to set things up. And in fact, I should just be able to select the hip and use that. It automatically links up all the bones because they're all named the same, but what you can see here, getting this exclamation point, and that's because I'm in this terrible pose and it's not good for retargeting animation. So to fix that, I'm going to add a T-pose frame, 1 frame before the animation starts. So I'll come over here to my time slider and type -1 to get an extra keyframe over here. Select my hip joint, right click, select hierarchy. So now all my joints are selected. The first thing I'm going to set to neutral is all the rotates. So I'll click and drag in the rotate section and type 0. And that will set all my joints to their original starting position, which is in T pose. Then I'll select translate X and translate Z, type 0. Oh, this character looks like it's defined differently, so don't do that. No, it's not defined differently. I take it back. The reason that happened is because I typed translates into all the joints. The only joint that I actually want to affect the translate on is the brute. So I'll clear my selection by clicking in the background, then only select the hips. Now at this point, I'll fix things by putting those to 0 and putting the height to 1. With all that in place, I'll reselect the entire skeleton. Highlight the rotate channels by clicking and dragging, then right click on my selection and say key selected. Which it's fighting me for some reason. Go back. Repeat the process. And then put those to 0 and put this to 1. Highlight all these, key selected. Oh, interesting. Huh. It's fighting me. It's fighting me hard. Okay. let me double check something that I might be telling you to do incorrectly. So right now I'm working on a reference file. Like I've said in the past, a reference file you can add to, but you can't take away. That's why reference files are nice. They block stuff. What might be happening is I'm not able to fix the key pose because that's on the source file. So I might need to real quick, close this, do a quick save, open up a fresh scene, import in directly the animation file. Now see if I can add in this extra keyframe because I'm working at the source level. Highlight the whole hierarchy, zero everything out. Key that, select the root. Zero those out. Centimeters, so it needs to be at 100. Okay, yeah, so, okay. All right, so this is the caveat that I need to mention. So when you're fixing your character to get this extra pose in there, you're gonna need to work in an empty scene and work on the source file. Now that I've done this, I've added this extra keyframe at -1. I can save. As, let's see, fixed or breakdance T-pose, like that. Then I'll reopen my original character. And this is actually going to be a good demonstration of why referencing files is pretty cool. So I can come in here and just update my reference to actually use replace reference to use the scene that I just made. Hopefully I'll get this new T-pose in here. So I didn't have to re-add all the stuff. I fixed it in the source file. I reference it in. Now I have access to this, which is great. Okay, so cool. Here in breakdance, you'll notice now I'm getting this green check mark because I've added the T-pose. If I go to frame 0, it breaks. If I go to frame 1, it's good. So as long as I lock it when it's green, I can now advance and everything's going to stay fine. Cool. So now that I have my breakdance defined, I have Billy defined, I can turn the wrestler visibility back on. I'll hide the breakdance. And under Billy's source, instead of none, I'll switch it over to breakdance. And you can see that my wrestler is now breaking it down, making it happen. Okay, so sorry for the hiccup there. I got that crucial ingredient, which is that if you wanted to add extra keyframes to an animation, you need to work on the source file. And so it needs to be in its own scene. You can add that keyframe once you've added it. Then it would be ready to bring into your scene with your character so you can transfer the animation. Does that make sense? Sorry for the confusion. Yeah. Maybe, kind of, sort of. Okay. All right, cool. So at this point, what I want to do is the last part of the demo, which is add a control rig or the human IK control rig to this character, and then bake the animation onto it, and then talk about a couple parts of this control rig or a couple ways this control rig works so that you can start to edit the animation and make it whatever you want it to be in the future. All right. So I'm on Billy. I'll go to none. Billy, I guess before I switch Billy to none, I'll go back to breakdance. Get him back in T-pose so that when I go to none, he remains in T-pose. 0. Okay, cool. So to add an entire rig to this character, it's as easy as one button. And it is this button here called Create Control Rig. So right now, if I were to click between my two tabs of definition and controls, I have no controls on Billy. If I were to click this button, now I have controls. That's as fast as it generated all the stuff that you spent several weeks doing. It's kind of nice. However, this thing works much differently than a lot of animation rigs I've ever used and a lot of kind of famous ones that you would download online. So the first thing that it does have an entire control set that's FK, forward kinematic, and it also has an entire control set that's IK. Right now, the only controls that are set to be IK or IK influenced only are the feet. So you can see, well, I guess the feet are independent, and that's because they're green. What I need to do first so that you can actually see the controls is make them bigger. By default, for whatever reason, they're teeny tiny. So underneath of the blue button, if you go to add the selection, you can select the entire IK or the entire FK control set. So I'll start with FK. And then over here in radius, if you type a bigger number like 5, you'll actually be able to see the controls. They look like joints right now, which can kind of be confusing. I don't like that. So you can also customize what the look of the rig is. I'm going to go to box, just so that all the controls look like boxes. I find it easy to click on and easy to understand when you're working on a control versus a joint. So edit control rig, rig look, box. Because I changed the look, I have to redo changing the size. So I'll go to FK, radius 5. Cool. So what you can see now is if I selected one of the controls and I rotated it, it behaves just like an FK rig, where everything below that control or out from the body moves with it, and everything before it doesn't. So right now, you might notice, well, why can't I rotate the leg? So this is where the other part of this rig comes in, and this is why it's kind of hard to work with. So see these where it's or like here on my controls, these are green. So that means that the IK controls are overriding everything and they're holding it in place. So if I were to move this root, oh, well, so that's not even the right controller isn't even visible. Let me go ahead and go through making the other controls big as well so you can see what I'm doing. So I'll add the selection IK, make these big as well so you can see. So these are all the IK controls. And if I were to click on this root and go like that, then it behaves like how our rig that we just made behaved, where when you move the root down, the IK feet stay in place and you get this nice knee bend and everything's looking good. So if I were to select this green ball, there are these couple little sliders down here. And what these are doing is it's saying either keep the IK thing in place or let it move around and follow everything. This is why I don't really like this rig. It's kind of weird. So anyway, if I were to select the foot and dial both of these down to 0, and then redo that same thing, now my leg is going like that. And so what you can think of these little spheres as is either turning on or turning off the IK influence. So if you wanted to animate with FK, make sure those are set to 0. If you wanted to animate with IK, make sure they're set to 1 so that they can actually do what you want them to do. Okay, so I can still move the foot around. It's just that it won't stay still if I don't have those sliders turned up. And you'll notice that it actually splits which attributes are staying still. If you only wanted it to stay still positionally, we can turn the T, that's translate, on. So it'll still rotate kind of freely. Or vice versa, you can make it so that it will only influence the rotate. Anyway, this is kind of getting into the minutia. It doesn't really matter. Just pay attention to these. If they're bright green, that means they're going to stay still. So it'll make animating with FK really, really frustrating, and pretty much it won't work. Okay, so now that I've got both my feet turned off, or as far as like they're not following. Now, if I were to select the FK control and rotate, oh, okay, there's one other thing. See these little pins? So if I select the control, it says pinning all, so that you would also have to unpin those. Now I believe you can rotate and do whatever you want. So the two things you have to turn off so that you can animate with the FK controls are, one, this IK blend, and two, make sure that there aren't the little pins appearing. So if I pinned all, now I can't animate with it. If I unpin it, now I can. Cool. I'll stop there. Questions so far? It's kind of weird. It's very different than how a lot of rigs work, but this is what's going on. All right. So now that I have my IK controls blown up so that I can actually grab them, and my FK controls blown up so I can see them, what I'll do is I'll set the influence back to breakdance, come up here to the blue button, say bake, and bake to control rig. And one other thing that's a pretty cool option is starting to use something called animation layers. So just like Photoshop and Illustrator and Adobe and all the products, there are layers of animation, and you can set them to work in two ways. One is additive and the other is override. So the way that, or why you would want it to be an override, is if you just want to have a bunch of different animation clips all taking up the same frames. So if you wanted like 12 different walk cycles and you just wanted to animate from frame 0 to 24, you could do that on different layers and they would override each other as you turn them on or off. And that's great. So then you don't have to have an animation timeline that's like 1,000,000 frames long and scrub through it to find the right walk cycle. You just know that all your walk cycles are 0 to 24. An additive layer is really useful for giving flavor to an animation or modifying an animation. So if you had a walk cycle that goes forward and you made a new layer that basically added in just like a little bit of a lean, you could make it look like they're like, you know, turning or something with the same walk, and all it is one keyframe of adding in this overlay pose. So we can go into that later. The reason I mention it is because in your bake options, you can bake it to a new layer versus only on the base layer. So I'm going to bake it to a new layer just for the demo. And everything else you can just leave as default. So bake. And then where your animation layer is over here in your layers tab. By default, it's on display. If you click anim, now you can see I have a base animation that's always there. If you don't have any animation layers, by default, it's just base animation. Now that I have an extra one, you can see that it is. And this is my bake results. So I'll name this breakdance. And if you right click on it, you can set the layer mode to one of the two that I just talked about. By default, it should be override, because this is like supposed to be its own animation. It's not adding to anything. And that's what I want. Cool. So any control that I select at this point, you'll see that I have a keyframe of animation on every single frame. And that's what it did. It went through and it cooked animation to every single frame, both IK and FK. And what I would recommend for working with and cleaning up files in general, I delete all the keyframes off of IK and I just leave FK. So that way I have a whole control set to mess with that can override the other. So to make that happen, need to be aware of one thing. Here is what Maya uses to determine how much of the rig you're influencing. So if I have this first option ticked and I select any control, the spine or the arm or the leg, if I delete this keyframe, it deletes keyframes for the entire rig, not just the one that I'm selecting. If I have the second option selected, it will only do a limb, but it will do everything on the limb. So if I had my hip selected and I deleted keyframe 0, it would delete all the keyframes for IK control and FK control on the entire leg from the hip down. The last option is just the control you're selected on. And so this is the important one to have active when you do this next step, because if you didn't have this one active and you deleted keyframes, it's going to delete all the keyframes, both IK and FK. And since I only want to affect one control set, I need to have this option active so that when I come up here to the blue button, go to add to selection IK, I can delete everything on the timeline. But my animation kind of keeps going. Oh, whoops. So the reason it's not going is here, this green button. So the IK control is still influencing everything. So if I dial that all the way down, now I'm back in action. So why is this working? Well, so the other cool buttons that you can turn off and on easily, this is visibility for IK or FK. So I'll turn off my IK right now. Visibility, it didn't delete anything. So right now, all my animation is coming from these controls. My FK controls will still have all the animation off. And you'll notice that all the limbs only have rotates. The only control that has, the only control that has translate is the root. And this is, I think I mentioned this before, this is how video game animation and most stuff gets cooked. The only joint that has positional information, movement information, is the root. And then that little root joint's going around and all the other joints are just rotating to make it look like the animation is working. So at this point, it would be really easy for me to come in here and start to add in some animation on the foot to fix something. So what I notice as this person lands, kind of wiggles around, it's not staying put, and it actually, it's pretty darn good. I take it back. Okay, here, the hand is a good one. So see how the hand gets kind of splashy as it moves around? What I want is that hand to hit the ground and just stay still. So what you could do is come in at like frame 31 or 33 maybe. No, we'll do 32. And at this point, I could turn off my FK controls so they're not kind of in the way. Turn on my IK and start to put some keyframes on here. So if I dial up the influence, you'll see that it's going to go back to its neutral position because it doesn't have any keyframes on it yet. So if I want it to stay there, I would hit S so that that's its position. Or not. Get down here. So this is the other reason that this rig can be challenging. The numbers up there in the translates and rotates, they're like kind of bonkers. It can be numbers that have no real relation to what's going on the rig. So I'm going to snap it down here. All right, so keyframe that. And so what can happen here is here on frame 31, I could dial my my influence of my IK control back down to 0. So my normal animation is happening. Set a key here. And then on the next frame, dial this up to 1 and set a new key. And so at this point, like there are a couple other controls you would have to do this to make the hand stay still, but that's basically the workflow. Is you let the original animation happen using the FK frames. And then if there's ever a time when you want this to stay still, you would dial up the influence of the IK and set a keyframe so that it stays still. And I'll do a much more in-depth demo using an example that has more slippy sliding feet or slippy sliding hands, so you can see the benefits of this. But I just wanted to mention it, talk about all the parts of the rig so that you're aware of them. So then the next time when I go through it, hopefully it's in your head and it won't be information overload. So I'll pause giving more facts and information at this point, just because it's a lot. But does anybody have any questions on what I've mentioned so far? Yeah.
How are you stringing together? Are you going to be using animation layers to?
Yeah, so you can do that. Like it's very much kind of whatever you think the workflow is going to work the best. So one animation I showed last time, possibly after the video stopped, was motion capture. All right, so one way would be to like, yeah, you copy it to the different animation layers, and then once you have all of them there, you could copy those frames and put them end to end on a single layer, and then like separate them by a little bit and then stitch them together with some custom animation to like make it go between. If you like, that's cool. And what that would be needed for is if you had kind of a continuous shot, you had no camera cuts, so the camera was going to reveal when those clips are changing, and you need to be able to have that be smooth. If you have camera cuts, then you could hide it. When the clip changes, you change the camera angle at the exact same time, and that pop won't be visible to your eye. You won't really register it, so you can kind of get around it that way. A third option is, let's see, is this? I think this is the right one. No, this is not the right one. Third option is to just have kind of duplicates of your character in the scene. Yes. And turn them off, turn the visibility of the character off and on. So that's what this person did. And the one file they had was this vault. So they did a vault. And then at a certain point, there was a roll. And so he turned off the vault character, turned on the roll character, and just lined them up. And then the character does a roll. And then after, you can see the pop right there. Because the character is moving so fast, you don't really notice it. But this is where the roll stops. And now an attack animation happens here at this point, where he like punches the guy and does all this cool stuff, right? So that's another way to get around it. You just have duplicates of the character in the scene, and you turn one off and you turn another one on. It's similar to like what I mentioned with props. If you're juggling or swinging a sword or doing something cool, you could like have one version of the prop in the hand and you look like you're going to throw, and then right when you let it go, you turn that sword off, and then you have just the normal sword that flips through the air, turn on, and then when you catch it in the other hand, it turns that prop on and turns that one off. So you're like doing a little bit of a magic show. And all this is freedom you get with this type of animation, production animation, or like rendered animation. You would have to think of a different way if you're doing it in video games, because they're kind of more persistent. Anyway, so yeah, there's a couple options for marrying together your clips. And a lot of the work, at least in my opinion, that happened here was the camera work. So a lot of the animation that Nathan spent was getting the camera to tell the story and like put more impact into the movements. And so the animation came together real quick. He got the character cooked and in the scene and swapped out. Then he spent a long time getting that camera exactly showing what he wanted to show. So, all right. So at this point, I want to kind of go around and check in individually, see where people are at with their ideation on their project, and see if they had any successes or failures in trying to define a character and maybe see if they can get that character to move with an animation. And I'll pause.